Today, we're digging into the psychology of Generation X parents, and honestly, it's a real puzzle. We're talking about a group of people who grew up with an almost radical level of independence, yet now they're raising their own kids in an age of super involved parenting. So what happened? How did we get here?
This quote, it just nails the central paradox, doesn't it? How on earth did the generation famous for its self-sufficiency, for just figuring things out on their own, end up getting called out for being too involved? Well, to really get their parenting style today, we have to rewind and look at their own childhoods. And that brings us to what you could call the latchkey kid paradox, because you really can't understand their present without understanding their past. So let's unpack what that childhood actually looked and felt like.
For a lot of you listening, this probably sounds really familiar. Having a key on a string around your neck, letting yourself into an empty house after school. This wasn't some rare thing. For millions of Gen X kids, this was just Tuesday. But why? Why was it so normal?
Well, this chart tells a huge part of the story. Just look at the shift. Between 1970 and 1990, the number of moms with young kids who were in the workforce, it just skyrocketed. It went from about 37% to nearly 60%. That one massive economic and social change basically created the latchkey generation on a scale nobody had ever seen before. Now that sounds incredibly harsh, right? But this quote from a 2004 study really gets to the heart of the impact this had. It wasn't just about being home alone for a few hours. It was about a fundamentally different level of parental supervision and, that emotional nurturing they received. And this whole experience created this dual reality. On one hand, you got this incredible independence. These kids learned how to solve their own problems, because who else was going to do it for them? Your parents weren't calling the school about a bad grade or getting involved in some spat with a friend. But on the flip side, that same self-reliance, it often felt a whole lot like loneliness. So all of that history, that entire childhood experience, it directly forged the modern Gen X parenting style. And it's been given a really cool name, the stealth fighter parent. It's a great term, isn't it? The idea is you're not hovering all the time. The stealth fighter trusts their kid to handle day-to-day stuff. But if a real threat shows up on the radar, we're talking serious bullying, a major problem at school, they engage with this focused, surprising intensity that can catch everyone completely off guard. And this is where we need to draw a really clear line, because it is not the same as the helicopter parent we hear so much about. The helicopter parent is managing every little thing. The stealth fighter wants their kid to figure out the small stuff, just like they had to. But they will absolutely go to war over the big things, giving their kids the backup they never had themselves. So when you ask why this specific approach, it all comes down to a single powerful memory, the ghost of that kid sitting alone in an empty house trying to figure things out. Gen X parents are making a very conscious choice to be the adult they wish they'd had in those moments, while still trying to hang on to that independence they learned to value so much. Now, you might think this is all just a gut reaction, an emotional response to their own past. But what's fascinating is that this style actually maps almost perfectly onto a well-researched psychological framework. Let's take a look at the authoritative blueprint. Way back in the 1960s, a psychologist named Diana Baumrind started this really groundbreaking work. And she figured out that you can pretty much understand most parenting styles by looking at just two things: how warm and responsive you are to your kids, and how high your expectations and rules are. So she basically came up with three main styles. You have authoritarian, that's high expectations but low warmth. Think because I said so. Then you have permissive, high warmth but low expectations, more of a friend than a parent. And then there's authoritative, high on warmth and high on expectations. And that right there is the sweet spot that so many Gen X parents naturally find themselves in. And there is a very good reason they lean this way, even if they've never heard the official term. Decades of research have shown that kids raised by authoritative parents tend to have higher self-esteem, better problem-solving skills, and better emotional regulation. In other words, this style produces the exact kind of person Gen X parents are trying to raise, independent but also supported. But, of course, it's not that simple. Gen X isn't parenting in some kind of vacuum. They're trying to do all of this while being squeezed by a really unique set of modern pressures that makes everything a lot more complicated. You've probably heard this term before, the sandwich generation. And for Gen X, it is so real.
So many of them are juggling the needs of their aging boomer parents on one side and raising their Gen Z or even Gen Alpha kids on the other. It's an immense amount of pressure, financially and emotionally, from both directions. And the challenges just keep piling up. Think about it. They're the very first generation to have to figure out how to raise kids in the age of social media. Many of them graduated into recessions, so they have this deep-seated awareness that job security is not a given. And they're constantly acting as translators between their own parents, who might think they're too soft, and their kids, who probably think they're too strict. So when you put all of these pieces together, their main goal becomes incredibly clear. What they're trying to do is pull off this really delicate balancing act. They want to keep the best parts of their own childhood, that resilience, that independence, but then add the one crucial layer that they so often felt was missing: emotional presence and real support. And maybe that's the real takeaway here. For a generation that was so defined by parental absence, maybe the whole revolution isn't about finding some perfect, flawless parenting model. Maybe the real goal is just to be present, to break a cycle by simply showing up, ready for the big fights, and making sure their kids know without a doubt that they are not alone.